We now turn to a more detailed look at these extraordinary manuscripts and of the Codex Calixtinus, and I have the privilege of having an old friend of ours, also of the Camino, Alison Stones, who will be speaking tonight on the manuscripts of the Codex Calixtinus. Alison has been a professor for many years at the University of Pittsburgh, and more recently a fellow both at Oxford and at Cambridge. And among her many projects, though, she's worked on various projects on secular manuscripts dealing with Lancelot Grail, the romances of Alexander, and going back to some of her early love and interest on the Codex Calixtinus, where she was one of the co-editors for the project that culminated in the Pilgrim's Guide to Santiago de Compostela, which I know you all will recognize by the end of all this that this was the prototype for the Michelin Guide today, I think, in some form or another. But the volume which Peggy Brown mentioned, the Compostela in Europe, will be in the bookshop here at the Met. Either tonight, it's already here, or next week it'll certainly be here. And in this volume, Alison has contributed an essay dealing with the manuscripts that you were focusing on today, the Codex Calixtinus. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you, Chuck. I'm honored to be part of this series of lectures commemorating St. James, and happy to join others in thanking the Xunta de Galicia for this opportunity and for their sponsorship of so many Jacobean activities, the splendid exhibition, of course, and the new journal Ad Limina, which I'll highly recommend to everyone. It's got some wonderful articles in it, as well as these events here at the Metropolitan Museum. And I thank also the staff of the Met. And it's a pleasure, too, to acknowledge being on this podium, sharing the podium with Peggy Brown and with the other speakers who will follow us. Now, if I can just manage to get to my bit on here. Let's see. Here we go. The Codex Calixtinus, Jacobus, or the Liber Sancti Jacobi. It says, the book itself says it's called Jacobus. Jacobus iste liber vocatus is the whole of the title, of which you see just a little bit here. It's, as Peggy has said quite a bit already, it's a 5-part compilation of texts that relate in one way or another to St. James the Greater, Apostle of Christ, and to the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela, which claims to house his relics. But there are only 12 copies of this compilation. That's not very many, compared with 200 copies of Terpene. It warrants thinking about. And not only that, they range in date from about 1140, the earliest, the one still preserved at the Cathedral of Santiago, the one that we see here on the screen, up to 1750 or thereabouts. 3 of them contain a shortened version. I'm going to get rid of the dock here. And 3 of them call the compilation Jacobus on their opening page. 4 of them are illustrated, and those are the ones I'm going to concentrate mostly on. 4 contain music, not the same 4, or were planned for music that was never added. So let me just run through again the textual context. Book 1, not the life of James at all, as Peggy has said, but the liturgy for the feasts, the Mass and the office of the Feast of St. James. There are 3 of them. The major one, the 25th of July, a secondary feast of the Miracles on the 3rd of October, and the Feast of the Translation on the 30th of December. Of course, the original Feast of St. James in the Visigothic liturgy fell on the 30th of December. But who is going to want to traverse the Pyrenees in the winter? So craftily, the feast, the major feast, somehow managed to be changed to the 25th of July. In the middle of summer, perfect timing. Book 1 is attributed in large part to the authorship of Pope Calixtus, who we've seen and will see again, but it also includes a number of compositions by famous people: Fulbert of Chartres, Cardinal Robert, who is he? Possibly Robert Pullen, William, Patriarch of Jerusalem, and several other people. The prologue was addressed to the Abbey of Cluny. No particular abbot is mentioned, not Peter the Venerable mentioned by name. Also to William, Patriarch of Jerusalem again, and to Diego, Archbishop of Compostela. At the epilogue, it says the book was written at various places, including Rome, Jerusalem, and especially Cluny. Let's just look at one or two of these people. Come on. Wait for my link. Here it is. Here he is. We've seen him already. See him again, writing away in his book. The opening page. He also composed this sermon, Sermo Beati Calixti, opening with a very curious initial S. He also wrote the famous Veneranda Dies sermon, which talks about liturgical practices in the cathedral, also due to the authorship of Calixtus. He also composed the added page presenting the office and the Mass for the Feast of the Miracles. This was an addition to the original book. Here's his name again, Calixtus Papae, with a little cross. And he also, again, is mentioned at the end of Book 1. And I won't go through all the spots where his name is forthcoming, because there are so many of them. But let's just look quickly at a bit of Book 3, where again he's responsible for the prologue to Book 3, which deals with the translation of James to Spain. And you'll see that here the decoration is a little different. And that's because alterations were made in the manuscript at Compostela over time. And this particular section was written probably in relation to Arnauld de Mont's visit from the monk of Ripoll, who came to Santiago in 1173 and copied parts of the Codex Calixtinus. Just one or two of the other authors who are mentioned. Bishop Fulbert of Chartres, here he is here, named. Several pages of chant music are due to him. Pope Leo composed a sermon. Pope Gregory. Here's a page by William, Patriarch of Jerusalem. We've also got Anselm of Canterbury involved as well. And a certain Bishop of Benevento is also an author, cited here. Up here at the top is the rubric giving his name. And then we've got Cardinal Robert coming in too. So as you can see, this is definitely a compilation put together from works, some of them spurious, but nevertheless an attempt at authenticity conveyed in these rubrics. Most puzzling of all is the name of Emericus Picodus, presbyter of Parthenay, and I'll show you his name here. He is the author of one of the songs that is among the musical editions at the end. After the Book 5, the Pilgrim's Guide, is a choir of songs added, and Amory's name is mentioned here. There's an Amory who's also mentioned in the text of the Pilgrim's Guide, but not of Parthenay, simply Americus Cancellarius, the chancellor of Calixtus II. And yes, Calixtus did have a chancellor called that. Amory's name pops up again in the false bull, which is also part of the editions at the end, where it says that this is a false bull. Innocent did certainly not write this bull, but nevertheless, it's a joke authentication claiming that the book was put together, it says here, by Pope Calixtus at first, and then by Aimeri Picot, who's also known as Olivier Disquin of Ville of Sainte Marie Madeleine of Vézelay, and his faithful companion Gerberger, his Flemish companion Gerberger. How unlikely is this? Extremely unlikely. So no, Aimeri Picot did not write the Pilgrim's Guide. I think, and so does my collaborator Jean Cronchalis, that it was put together actually by Rhinarius, the schoolmaster, and I'll have more to say about Rhinarius in a moment. This is the colophon telling us that the book was put together in many places, beautifully written out in display script, in Frisia, in Italy, in Teutonica, Germany, in Frisia, and especially at Cluny. Is that true? Probably not. Back to the textual contents again. The 22 miracles form Book 2, of which the most recent is dated 1135, and I'll say a little bit more about the miracles later. The translation of St. James from the Holy Land to Spain. This is after his death, his faithful companions picking up his body and setting off in the boat. And the boat is made of stone. Not only did it have no rudder, but it's a stone boat. And this is very important. It shows up in the iconography in interesting ways, as we shall see. Book 4, the Historia Terpene, that we've heard quite a lot about already. Book 5, the Pilgrims Guide. And here we have some limiting dates too. In the text is mention made of the deaths of Henry I of England and Louis VI the Fat, giving us limiting dates of after 1135 and after 1137. But we know also that the text was dedicated and sent to Diego Galmez, who died in 1140. So this is giving us really quite a narrow little window of time, most likely then between 1137 and 1140. For the composition of the 5 books, and for, I believe, too, the production of the manuscript at Santiago. The added material we've just looked at a bit of, the Mass for the Feast of the Miracles is an added page, the false bull is added at the end, there's an Alleluia in Greek, a miracle of 1139. Why didn't they stick that in with the other miracles? Well, because they'd already been written by then, most likely. And a collection of songs, of which we've just seen the one by Emery Picot of Parthenay. And bits were recopied, as I've also just said. Now, 12 manuscripts is not very many, but they are enormously interesting, each one in and of itself. So I'll just run through the 4 illustrated copies. Oh, and there are also 2 versions. Well, actually 3, really. A long version containing all 5 books and the supplementary material, of which 4 are illustrated. And then there's a short version, and then there's a special version. So the 4 illustrated copies, and they all include a portrait of James. First of all, the Santiago copy that's still there in the Archivo de la Catedral, which calls the book Jacobus, and it's got music. It's very fully, it's very full in all dimensions, let's say. Manuscript A is in the British Library, made about 1325 at Santiago, a direct copy of C. And I'm using these sigla, so it saves having to say out the whole of the shelf number every time. And that's what text editors have done. So A, written about 1325 in Santiago. VA, also written about 1325 in Santiago, and also a direct copy of C. And they both have quite interesting subsequent histories. Then there's S, and S is a special case. It doesn't call the compilation Jacobus. It doesn't have a title at all. It's got only spaces for notation, but the music was never filled in. And it's got some variance in terms of what is chosen to be illustrated. And you could even see that the treatment of James is a little bit different too, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Then we've got our 4 unillustrated copies. They look frightful, but they're very interesting historically, and they may depend on earlier intermediaries. So manuscript T, Cotton Titus A19 of the late 14th century, copied in England, and perhaps depending on an early version, maybe even one sent by Diego Galmez to Thurston, Archbishop of York. That is distinctly possible, although we can't actually prove it because that intermediary has gone. Then there's P. Oops, sorry. Let's see. Very sensitive, my machine here. The slightest touch will have it bouncing around. P. In the Archivio di Stato in Pistoia, a very important copy. No title again, no music, no space for music, and all kinds of other stuff is in there. And here's where we learn about Rhinerius, the schoolmaster at Santiago. under Archbishop Gelmirith, an interpolation into Book 1. And he was also involved with Atto, Bishop of Pistoia, negotiating between the two of them about the acquisition by Pistoia of a relic of St. James around 1138. Even as the Pilgrim's Guide is being composed in just that moment, saying that the relics of St. James are immovable. But the reality was quite different. They separated out the mastoid process. And yes, it did come to Pistoia, and it's still there in the gorgeous golden altar in the Cathedral of Pistoia. And it produced a number of miracles of its own on the way. And when, in the 19th century, and you can read about this in the Acta Sanctorum, the body of James and his companions were re-excavated from the ambulatory, where they had been buried in the 16th century due to threat from the Spanish Armada, Drake and the Spanish Armada's invasion. They dug them up again in the 19th century and found 3 bodies. One of how to tell which was James's. Well, they sent off to Pistoia, and along came the relic, and guess what? It fitted, one of them. So P is a very important copy, even though it doesn't have any pictures in it. Then there's M in the Biblioteca Nacional in Madrid. This one is signed and dated, very nice too, in 1538, copied in Santiago from C, most likely. And it's got excerpts, and our Fra Juan de Ascona was an antiquarian. He was very interested in including drawings and all kinds of other things, along with his excerpts or his copy of the Codex. Then there's SV, again in Madrid. Now we're moving on chronologically into the 17th century, copied from another exemplar, and the scribe VS tells us quite a lot about it. And he had a lot of trouble reading his model, as we'll see shortly. Then there's the special version, which is excerpts from the long version, preserved in Lisbon, in the context of a miscellany of texts about St. Martin of Tours. So whoever put this together was interested in collecting hagiographical material. Then we've got our short version, 3 copies of that, beginning with R, copied in Santiago from probably C by Arnauld de Munt, monk of Ripoll in 1173. And it's probably something to do with this visit that occasioned the recopying of C of certain sections in the text. We don't know quite exactly how that worked. Arnauld tells us that he made the copy because he'd heard that Santiago was a place worth visiting, and he also wanted to bring back to his monastery of Ripoll some better chants to honor St. James at Ripoll. Then we've got VB and Z, both interesting historically. VB copied from a copy, again, an intermediary lost, that had belonged to the historiographer Juan de Mariana, which Mariana says he prized it auro et gemmis maius, but he thought the Pilgrim's Guide was a pack of lies. And he was certainly not wrong in that. And then finally, Z, an antiquarian collection of documents of interest to the history of Spain, and came into the hands of Buriel, the antiquarian of Toledo. So it's an interesting reception history. But what's most interesting is how few copies there are. It makes it absolutely certain that the Pilgrim's Guide contained as Book 5 was not the book that every pilgrim had in their pocket as they went to Santiago. The information must have been transmitted by other means, most likely word of mouth. Our collation of the Pilgrim's Guide indicates that there can never have been more than 25 or so copies ever of the Pilgrim's Guide section. All this, of course, in sharp contrast to the situation that pertained to the Terpene, which, as we've heard, was among the most popular texts of the whole Middle Ages. 200 is a lot. It's up there with Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae. Everybody had a copy, everybody read it, but that is not true of all the other 4 books of the Jacobus and Codex. So this is just a diagram showing us some of the there's a possible archetype up here on which S and C would from which they would both derive. Most of the copies depend on C, as you can see. There's another intermediary here. There are several intermediaries over here. It's possible that where the question mark comes, there may be an intermediary there. But even so, a collation of the text of the guide clearly indicated there aren't enough mistakes to warrant the reconstruction of more copies than about 25, about double the number of what survives today. I'd like to just say a word or two about the unillustrated copies, and then I'll proceed on to the illustrated ones. Whether or not there are pictures doesn't depend on which version it is, whether long or short. They sort of mix up in relation to that. But just another word or two about how they look and how difficult they are. This was the devil to read. Down here is the beginning of the Pilgrims Guide section. The Vestroia Copy, also very difficult indeed to read. This is the beginning of the Terpene section. You can see the display lettering for Torpinus Dei here, and the end of the prologue to that. And oops, looks like I didn't link that correctly. So we'll pass over the beginning of the Pilgrim's Guide. M is enormous fun. It includes, this is, let's see, this is the beginning of the Pilgrim's Guide from copy M. No, I'm sorry, the beginning of the thing altogether. The prologue to Book 1, in fact, is here. And this is the context in which Juan de Ascona, here's his signature down below. This is a copy he made of the altar stone at Padrone. And he was very interested in lettering and inscriptions and so forth. SV had a lot of trouble reading his model and very often left dots to indicate that. If we move down a little bit to the beginning of the Pilgrim's Guide, which talks about the 5 routes that go through France, he couldn't read it, see? He left blank with dots, the bits he couldn't read. The model he got obviously was even worse to read than Juan de Ascona's script. And so we can sympathize with SV as in his task of copying. I'll pass over Lisbon because our photographs are so absolutely awful of it. And I'll just pull up a bit from the Ripoll copy, which is actually very nicely copied. And it's these little initials here that make me think that the redone bits of C must have had something to do with Arnold's visit, whether Arnold couldn't read part of what was in the original. It's hard to say, but certainly the decoration and the script is quite like the altered bits in C. And then this is Arnold's letter addressed to the abbot of Ripoll to justify why he thought it was worth going to Santiago and telling us what he wanted to achieve by his trip. Very unusual that a monk would nip off actually without the permission of his abbot, and so one would like to know more about Arnold and what he was really up to. Was he fleeing from something or something of that sort? And then our 2 antiquarian copies here. This one is a palimpsest, and that made it fairly tricky to figure out. You can see the original use of previous use of parchment underneath the copying of the beginning of the Pilgrim's Guide here on this folio. And I'll just show a little bit of the music, about which Margot Fassler, I'm sure, will have lots more to say. Most of it is in Book 1 of C, and it's presented in various ways and various levels within the text of the office. You've got a lot of pages that are nothing but music and chant here. This, again, one edited by Pope Calixtus. But sometimes it's just tucked in here, in between the prayers, a little bit of a little line and a little tiny bit of notation for this chant here, the Jesus vocavit, Jesus calling James. And we've already looked at the ad honorem, and then there's this is another piece of among the additional material at the end. The Dum Paterfamilias chant is a pilgrim song written in campo aperto without any stave lines at all, and I'm sure you'll hear lots more about that. Now, some of the copies are interested in the music and copy. The Ripoll copy has very interesting notation. This chant here, look at the Galicianorum Dux line here, and you can see it just, because it's an awful reproduction, here on this top line. Those same words appear in this detail from the Ripoll manuscript, written in Aquitanian notation and of enormous interest to the musicologists. I know you can't see it very well, but next time somebody's in Ripoll, we really need some better pictures. Another chant here, this is the O Lux et Decus Hispaniae chant, which can be seen down here in the Vatican manuscript, and the placing on the page is quite different, and that's because some of these copies are very much bigger than C. C is a little book, it's about this big, but the Vatican copy is much bigger, and so is the Salamanca copy. Here's the O Lux et Decus Hispaniae chant here. With a red line, they hadn't got round to adding in the actual notation, although they probably had planned to do so. And here, that was S, I think, and this is VA. This is the chants from the end. Here's the tail end of the colophon to Book 5, and then we start right in with the Nostra Phalanx. They've left spaces for the musical notation, but they haven't actually filled it in. Whereas here in C, here's the Nostra Phalanx chant with a lot of notation to go along with it. So this just shows that when the copies were, the later reception of these copies includes not just the text and the decoration, but also the music, to give one a beautiful rounded picture of the whole thing. Now let's turn to the illustration. There's actually a lot less of it than one might imagine. As Peggy has said, the texts are exciting, riveting, the miracles are fun, the pseudo-Terpene is riotous and hilarious. There would have been a great deal to illustrate. And in some senses, the illustrations that are there are a little bit on the disappointing side. They're concentrated on the portrait of Calixtus, except that not every copy gives you that. Here, for instance, in copy A, we've got a very nice, but nonetheless, it's only a pen-flourished initial. And this is a copy that may have been owned or made for a king of Spain, because you've got the arms of Castile and Leon in the bottom margin, rather discreetly added, so it's not exactly super convincing, but it's possible that there was royal ownership here in the additional copy. And the Vatican copy gives us a very faithful rendering of the Calixtus portrait. Somebody clearly wanted to make it look as much like C as they could, varying the colors a little bit, certainly, but nevertheless picking up in the 14th century the 12th century foliage types and even the drapery forms, paying very careful attention to what the model showed. Sad to say that initial got cut out in the Salamanca copy. Then we get the portrait of James that you've seen a couple of times already, and the Salamanca one is the distinctive one because it's here that we get James togged up as a pilgrim with his hat and a shell on it. He's holding his staff, a book, and the scrip, very important, the little bag of the pilgrims carry, which has a shell on it. And you've probably seen pilgrims on their walk, and they, whenever possible, wear this emblem. And I've got one myself, even though I have to say I haven't actually walked, which is a bit of a shameful confession. Again, for the portrait of James, the Vatican copy is sticking as close as he possibly can to his model. Here's where the additional copy differs a little bit. There, this artist is giving James a bunch of shells in his halo, And he's omitted the frame, but nevertheless, it's the standing blessing type of portrait that we're getting here. And I'll run through the rest of the illustrations, and then I'll turn to one or two parallels in other contexts for these images. The next one is the dream. Sad to say, this is how it looks today in manuscript C, and where's Charlemagne, you may say? He should be here. And alas, when it was restored and clearly very badly damaged, it's the other side of from the red over here. When they restored it in 1966, they didn't take the trouble to look at one of the other copies to see how it ought to be. And here's Charlemagne in bed in the additional copy, with St. James appearing before him, pointing to the Milky Way up here, which will lead him to Santiago. And the Vatican copy is giving us a very closely similar rendering, but without the shells in the halo. Again, the Milky Way prominent, and the Oppidum Carolus Magni Rex identified once again by inscription, Aachen, the palace, is Zed Aquis Granum on the other side. The copy in Salamanca, again, is a little bit different. Just as it was different in its treatment of the portrait of James, so too it's different in the narrative scenes that accompany the Terpene. Up here at the top is James appearing to Charlemagne, as we saw. Peggy had this reproduction too. And what's going on is why he's got to go. Here are the Saracens busy at it. The second picture down here is also found in C and in the Vatican copy. Charlemagne and the army setting out with Roland carrying a banner. And then this puzzling scene down below of a bunch of warriors holding spears, and it's really odd. What on earth are they doing? Just standing there. Originally, the titulus for Book 4 came beneath this red. In the 17th century, the manuscript C was taken apart, and the pseudo-Terpene was excerpted from the rest of the book to make a book all on its own. This is the time when Philip was setting up the Royal Library of the Escorial, and they looked at C to see whether it would do to be taken off to the Escorial. They decided against it. No doubt Mariana's comment had something to do with that. Anyway, here you turn over the page, and here are the warriors setting out in C, and then here they are, presumably having come back, telling tales about the campaigns or something. It's a very odd choice of subject. Given all the jolly things that go on in Terpene, you'd think that they could have come up with something a bit more interesting in a way. Once again, the page is missing in additional, sadly. And in the Vatican copy, we see how the original inscription would have looked. That glorious Historia Terpeni that we see in C is actually 16th century lettering. These two registers giving us a closely similar version. And here in the Salamanca copy, all of that gets crammed into one page. But you turn over and you've got a different subject altogether here. This is a letter T, the beginning first letter of the word Terpene for the text of Book 4, the pseudo-Terpene account. And what we're getting is the end of the story. Terpene is witnessing the transportation to heaven of the souls of the dead warriors of Roncevaux. Here they are in a napkin being raised up to heaven, where they're going to be received by Christ and the Virgin. And over here, the devil is fleeing away. So this is another reason why we think that probably S derives from a different model from C and Vatican and additional. The other picture that's, let me just show Terpene first. Here's to remind you the C's version of the opening of Terpene, a gorgeous initial T. And it's a funny one, because what does an enormous letter T usually do in illumination of the Middle Ages? It's the te igitur for the Mass from a missal. So I think this is, in a way, a kind of joke in the spirit of what the pseudo-Terpene is overall. And this is the lettering that I was mentioning, which has nothing to do with the original. This was added in later when the book was separated out to form a separate code. The book 4 was made into a separate codex. Once again, the Vatican copy is giving us a very faithful rendering, trying so hard to duplicate the mask head, the interlace, the dragons, the foliage types, as well as the portrait of Terpene in the middle of this initial. And again, it's quite amusing that his blessing hand is clearly warding off the evil represented by the mask head above him. And then, finally, in the Salamanca copy, we've got this. James Matamoro, slayer of the Moors, although there aren't any Moors, actually, in this rendering of the subject. An image that doesn't come in any of the other copies. It's special to copy S. So that's what we get in the way of illustrations. So let's now look at a few comparisons. The portrait of James is very surprising. Standing frontal, blessing, holding a book, he could almost be Christ. He's certainly very close in treatment to the standard type of Christ. Whether standing, here we've got, here's somebody who really is Christ. Cross in the halo gives it away immediately. And that's the sort of model that was being called upon to give this portrait of James. There's another James who also is sometimes represented this way, but it's the wrong James. This is James the Less, the author of the Epistle of James in the New Testament. Interestingly enough, this is one of the manuscripts from Saint Martial of Limoges. And perhaps here too there's a bit of a joke involved. Saint Martial, the outfit that claimed that their hero Martial had been an apostle. The writer of the Pilgrims Guide thought that was a pile of nonsense and related the story of Martial in relation to Eutropius of Saint. And he missed out a stop at Saint Martial de Limoges altogether. He routed the pilgrims from Saint Léonard de Noblat, up the street, as it were, directly to Saint Front at Périgueux, missing out the vital stage of Saint Martial, whose pilgrimage church resembled that of Santiago. What an amazing omission, but a deliberate one in my view. There are other people who get nice frontal portraits that could be invoked as well, as parallels in some measure for the James portrait. This is, it's not Charlemagne, it's actually Charles the Bald from the copy of privileges of the Abbey of the Cartulary of Marchienne, North French Abbey, not far from Lille. And then here's another example of a nice frontal portrait of the 12th century. One of the bishops, in fact, Bishop Hugo, it says so here, Hugo Episcopus, Bishop Hugo of Le Mans, beautifully presented as a frontal portrait, with drapery down here, the nested V's and the pleating effect, very similar stylistically to the James portrait, although there's a bit more movement in the swing of the drapery here than in the very static portrait of Hugo. Let's move on to the dream. Remembering what I just said about the sad restoration here. There are lots of parallels for this. Dreams are a big number, and there are several splendid studies of dreams. It's a theme that pops up also on the Charlemagne shrine in Aachen, made about 1200. Remember that Charlemagne, as Peggy had mentioned, was canonized in 1165, no doubt as a result of all this. And sure enough, among the panels on the roof of the Aachen shrine is this splendid depiction of St. James appearing to Charlemagne in bed with his feet poking out. And here he is at the window, his bedroom window, looking at the Milky Way as St. James had told him to do. And then this is going to be the territory that he's going to be crossing on his way to Santiago. And here's the context of that. It's the first of the scenes over here. And there's his portrait in 3D on the end of the shrine, preserved still in the treasury of the Cathedral of Aachen. Even the Rolandslied pays attention to this. It's not St. James, but an angel who appears to Charlemagne here, and he's actually shown as a warrior, not as a king. And of course, it appears also in the Charlemagne window at the Cathedral of Chartres. Carolus, it says down here. This is St. James, and here's Charlemagne in bed. And it's part in the Charlemagne window of the middle section that deals with the Spanish campaign. And down below is the account, as Clark Mains has shown, based on the text that relates Charlemagne's trip to Constantinople. And I'll have more to say about that in just a moment. People love the dream scene. It's a great story. And it's picked up very quickly by the Grande Chronique de France. And I should scroll over a bit, yeah. Which treats it in various different ways. This is the French royal history put together in association with Saint-Denis, in fact, to glorify the French crown and whoever was sitting in it, so to speak. And here we are. Charlemagne is wearing the imperial crown with the bar on the top, not in bed this time, but nevertheless he's looking up at the Milky Way. Here it is spreading all across this double column miniature, and he and St. James are debating. It almost looks like Charlemagne has the upper hand, really, judging by the pointing finger, and St. James is on the listening end of this. But nevertheless, that's clearly who it is, halo and all, and he's dressed up once again, as in S, in the pilgrim outfit, with shell on hat, scrip with shell holding the staff. This is the Charlemagne sequence in the royal copy of the Grande Chronique. Gives us many scenes relating to Charlemagne, and this is one that relates to Santiago. He's giving privileges to Santiago, and he's praying there. And here's a statue of St. James on the altar. This is the copy made for Charles V, and I'm afraid my illustration isn't that great, because I downloaded it from the BN site. Here's Charlemagne in bed wearing his crown, and there's St. James dressed as a pilgrim, pointing vaguely off over here, and I'm afraid we don't get to see the Milky Way in that image, and you almost see it better in the small detail. And then just a few more for fun. This is a variant text. It's not the Grande Chronique, it's the Histoire des Conquêtes de Charlemagne. A grisaille drawing, beautifully done, and here's James walking right into the bedchamber, dressed up as a pilgrim to encourage Charlemagne to get on with it. And I found my bar. And this gorgeous copy, illustrated by Jean Fouquet. And where is the dream, you may be wondering? Well, it's tucked in the corner over here. There's Charlemagne in bed in the palace chapel, in his palace, I should say, and St. James behind. And then here he is celebrating Mass before they're off to attack over here. Gorgeous picture and a favorite. And here's another version. And this is a very strange one, because, again, Charlemagne has the upper hand. Even though St. James is pointing, it almost looks like St. James is kneeling before Charlemagne, which is a bit of a reversal, if that's really the case. And there are many more. This is just a little taste of how popular the dream scene is. And of course, it's related to all kinds of other dreams. Dreamers generally are extremely popular. This is the lower bit of the Charlemagne window, which shows Charlemagne appearing in a dream to Constantine V. And this has to do with the campaign in the Middle East. After which Charlemagne is given relics to bring back and so forth. And then, of course, there's also the real, as it were, Constantine. And this isn't no bigger a picture. Sorry about that. This is Constantine dreaming that he will triumph in the sign of the cross and defeat Maxentius at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, as related also, of course, in the Stavilo triptych, preserved at the Morgan Library, where it's part of a whole series of roundels. It's this one down here, where the angel is pointing out the cross. Here's the victory and the routing, and then, of course, as a result of that, Constantine is converted, and then we're off onto Helen, his mother, and the finding of the true cross, and all of this enclosing, of course, the relics of the cross. Another version of that story is here at St. Helens Kellow in Durham, County Durham, where again, here's Constantine receiving the word from an angel, and then down below we turn to the Helen aspect of the story. And this monumental stone cross, now embedded in the wall in this church, would have no doubt had a true cross relic enclosed here in this little cavity in the cross itself, which would have been covered up with a piece of rock crystal, no doubt. But Constantine and Constantine V are not the only people where dreams are important. And I just allude to another couple of popular dream subjects in relation to other people. This is Christ appearing to Saint Martin of Tours, a Roman soldier who, of course, is best known for dividing his cloak with the beggar, who turns out to be Christ in disguise. And here again, the dream, a very important part of this 11th century shrine book relating the life and miracles of Saint Martin. And then just one more example, is Saint Michael appearing to Bishop Aubert of Avranches, telling him to go off and found the monastery of Mont Saint-Michel on the mount of which takes the name of Michael. Again, a dream event. And there are many more that one could invoke as parallels for the dream in the Terpene illustrations. I'm at a loss to know what to say about the warriors. They're so tricky. An army setting out is so commonplace at the time of the Crusades that, what can one say? So I just allude to a couple of wall paintings from Western France. This is the Templar Commandery at Cressac near Angoulême, where we've got a bunch of 12th century warrior paintings. And there's not too much more I can say than that, really. And I have no parallel at all for this bunch of people standing with their swords and debating with each other. Much more fun is the souls question, so let's turn to that next. The only picture in the Codex Calixtinus Jacobus tradition, it's the Codex. In fact, Salamanca doesn't call the book Jacobus, so it's the Codex Calixtinus. For the Terpene vision of the souls going to heaven, this is another subject that the Grande Chronique loved, and so did other texts, not just the Grande Chronique de France, but here the Chronique de l'Anonyme de Béthune includes a chunk on Charlemagne, and this is what they pick out, one of the Roland series that they pick out. This is Roland's soul going to heaven, and the souls of Ganelon and the evil betrayers carting off to hell by a devil. It does come up in the Grande Chronique. This time it's the pagan king Marsil who is taken off to hell as Terpene is at his altar. And over here we focus once again on the fate of Ganelon, the betrayer of Roland, the event which is also related in the pseudo-Terpene, of course. He gets to be drawn and quartered, and that's happening here. And then up here, souls of the wicked are received by devils, whereas the soul of Roland is carted off by an angel. Here we're not getting what happens to the souls, but we are getting, this is the neuf preux, of whom Charlemagne is one, the 9 worthies. Ganelon, again, his fate is the drawing and quartering, and prominent in the foreground here is the dead Roland. Not quite the same treatment and no interest in souls, but never mind. It's a wonderful frontispiece to the Sébastien Mamereau neuf preux. Here we've got a printed copy of the Grande Chronique, and a new element is introduced. Terpene is celebrating Mass even as a devil takes the soul of Ganelon and an angel takes that of Roland. And who is present here this time but Charlemagne, holding a book? it may well be that this is a combination image of not just Terpene's vision of the souls, but also his remission of the sin of Charlemagne, an event which is referred to in the Pilgrim's Guide in passing in the context of the visit to the shrine of St. Giles at Saint-Gilles-du-Gard in southern France. And all the Pilgrim's Guide has to say is our blessed St. Giles remitted the sin of Charlemagne. That's all that is said. Just a hint. But elsewhere, they were very interested in this whole thing. What happened and how? And we have a couple of 12th century wall paintings that focus on this. Here is, you can just see the Magnus part of Carolus here and the Egidius here. It's hard to make this out. A very poorly preserved wall painting, which Charlemagne is kneeling before St. Giles over here, who is remitting the sin. It's happening at Chartres in the crypt chapel of St. Clement, where, again, they're tucked in. And this is such an amusing gesture, this bishop saint looking over at what's going on, because here's Giles celebrating Mass, Egidius, his name written in. Here's Carolus kneeling by the altar, and the scroll has got writing on it, but what did it say is what we want to know, because the question is, what is the sin? Well, other versions tell us, and it's the life of St. Giles that tells us, the sin is incest. And the product of the sin is none other than Roland. Yes, isn't that shocking? There's an allusion to it too in the Chartres window, the topmost panel, and the question is, was it really the topmost or the second to the top? Was the death of Roland really the original top panel? And Clark Mains has gone into this in detail. Same thing is happening. Another instance at Chartres, this same subject. Charlemagne sitting, looking repentant. Giles celebrating Mass. An angel is bringing the scroll. What happens is Giles celebrates the Mass and the writing on the scroll disappears, indicating that God has forgiven Charlemagne. And funnily enough, it crops up in Liège. Now, what on earth is this subject doing in a prayer book from Liège? We have no idea. I've checked with Judith Oliver, the Liège manuscript specialist, and she doesn't have an explanation for this either. Here's Giles celebrating the Mass. Here's Charlemagne, and here's the lady. And here is the angel with the scroll. Very interesting. One would love to know more about who was interested in this in Liège. Miles from Saint-Gilles, miles from Santiago. And then, of course, the culmination, this glorious panel by the so-called master of St. Giles, an artist whose identity we don't know, of the Mass taking place at none other place than Saint-Denis. Here's the Dagobert tomb. Here's the gold cross made by Saint-Éloi, bits of which are still extant in the Cabinet des Médailles. Here's the golden altar frontal given by Charles the Bald. And here's the emperor over here. And there's the angel holding a little bit of parchment with the sin. And of course, here is Giles busy celebrating the Mass. A wonderful painting. And the National Gallery's website isn't too bad, except I couldn't understand why they identify the king as Charles Martel. I think I have to write to them and say that this is absolutely out of the question. It has to be Charlemagne. And then just finally, there's Matamoros. James, the slayer of the Moors. Because of his legendary intervention at the Battle of Clavigo in, and I never can remember the date, 844 I think it is, in which he miraculously intervenes on the side of the Christians to defeat the Saracens. And fairly early in the tradition is this relief, not a very good picture of it, it's better in the catalogue, of St. James with praying people. But this is not quite, the Moors killed off by James exactly, and that's interesting. The S version gives no people at all in it, and this copy of the Tumbo Menor de Castilla. Also, nobody is there, but it's as though this is a pennant on top of the building here. No victims, but in Tumbo Bay, painted by the same artist who did our manuscript A. Here's St. James with cockle shells in his halo. Clearly, this is the artist of manuscript A. Tumbo Bay is a cartulary of Santiago, produced in the 1320s, about the same time as A and V, A, and S were copied at Santiago. And guess what? Here they are, the defeated Saracens dismembered on the ground. Below the warrior James, above whom is the saint himself in the top, holding his staff. And it's not Christ because he's got shells in his halo. It's James enthroned. The subject was immensely popular, and there are thousands of examples all over Spain, wonderful ones. This is one of my favorites, this wonderful manuscript here. And here we've got the severed head of a Saracen down below. And of course, it also appears in sculpture. It's all over Santiago. This is this wonderful statue in the cathedral showing the warriors, the Moors being killed off by James raising his sword here. But today, it's presented like this. We've got flowers in front of the dead Saracens. A little gesture towards what we might call political correctness. To conclude, the Codex Calixtinus tradition, and Jacobus too, inspired a rich iconography for our hero James and his associate Charlemagne in two ways. First, through the illustrations in the 4 illustrated copies. Second, through its texts, whose colourful stories inspired a vigorous network of painting and sculpture independently of the Codex Calixtinus. Both traditions combined to offer a complex network of pictures, of characters and deeds that fascinated audiences then and now. The stars leading to Santiago continue to shine. Thank you.